In January 1999, Rod Smallwood invited Steve Harris over to his place in Brighton for a secret rendezvous with none other than one Bruce Dickinson. It was to be the first time the pair spoke properly since 1993. Steve Harris had two questions for Bruce.
See, obviously the first question to Bruce was, why do you want to come back? And the second question was, how long are you going to stay for? Because it's no good if he's going to bugger off again after 18 months. I wanted to make sure he was going to be with us for the long haul.
He was, a bit like, I'm still not sure exactly why you left sort of thing. He said it a couple of times and then he said, but that doesn't matter now. And I went, oh, but it does matter. And so I told him, this is why I left. I can't remember exactly what I said, but at the end I said, does that make sense? And he went, well, yeah. I thought, well, that's all right then.
If it were about money, Dickinson notes they would have packed it in years ago. It was about chasing the dream again. Dickinson thought this was a huge opportunity.
It was an opportunity for Maiden to kind of take the high ground again, not necessarily to do a commercial album or something dreadful like that, but actually to do a real heavy metal record and blow everybody's balls off live. As long as that was the aim and we all agreed on it, I was really into it. What I didn't want was for us to end up gradually lolling back into complacency. But thankfully, when we talked about it, it was like everybody sort of had the same idea. Steve was really into it too. He doesn't want to see this as some sort of comeback. To him, this is like just the next step in Iron Maiden. That's exactly how it should be. The thing is, why do you want to come back now? Because I'm sick of doing clubs. I want to do big things again. I want to finish off playing to 20,000 people, not 2,000.
Despite his reservations, Harris agreed. And just like that, Bruce was back in Maiden. But he wasn't the only one coming back. As Steve Harris tells it,
Adrian was the only one who wasn't there, but it rang him on my mobile to tell him. I remember standing in the pub car park on the phone. I laid it all on the line, said, I want you back, because it takes Maiden somewhere else, musically.
The next day, Smith's return was confirmed. And 2 days later, the reformed Iron Maiden had its first photo shoot. Only Smith didn't come back to replace Yannick Gers, but Maiden now found itself a six-piece, with a three-pronged guitar attack that Steve Harris had envisioned in the mid-70s, finally coming to fruition. Don't call it a comeback though, this was just the next chapter in Maiden's evolution. With that, the band embarked on the short Ed Hunter World Tour, which took them to the US and Europe, and was complemented by a best-of CD called Ed Hunter, which featured a video game of the same name. As a 16-year-old metalhead at the time, I remember playing this video game on my PC, and let's just say it was no Fortnite. But the game's shortcomings were in no way an omen of what was yet to come. Having parted ways with producer Martin Birch after his retirement in 1992, Maiden sought out the services of Kevin Shirley, who had previously worked with the Black Crowes, the Baby Animals, Rush, Aerosmith, the Divinyls, Jackal, and Silverchair's breakout 1995 debut album, Frog Stomp. Initially though, Shirley was reluctant.
To be honest, when I got the call, I was less enthusiastic than I should have been, because it appeared to me that they were a band that had maybe lost their way. I was concerned because I'd had a look at where they'd been and the trajectory of the album. It seemed like there was a pattern emerging and it didn't look good, so I was apprehensive about it.
While he agreed, he urged the band to take a fresh approach to recording. He told Louder Sound years later,
Obviously, I grew up with the old-school recording methods, where you'd record the drums first, then the guitars, and it took forever. But I could see how there was this intangible energy you'd get just from having musicians playing together, so I was dead keen on Maiden doing that. Steve, in particular, was very hesitant about it. He said he didn't think it was gonna work, so I said, if it doesn't work, then we'll go back and do it as you've done previously, but let's give it a try. Pretty much as soon as they'd done one or two run-throughs, he said, I never want to work another way again.
Now more mature, the band didn't engage in squabbles over whose song would make it on the album, whose wouldn't, or who gets a songwriting credit and who doesn't. As Dickinson recalls,
the first thing that has to happen, and which did happen, was everybody was pretty cool and laid back about getting their songs on or not getting their songs on. Everybody was aware that everybody had to have a bit of give and take. We were reading off the same script.
The band entered the studio in Paris, France at Guillaume Tell Studios, and what emerged was arguably the band's best work since 1988's Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, 12 years prior. The lead single, the 4-minute big chorus crowd-engaging The Wicker Man, came first on May 8, 2000, rocketing to the top 10 on the mainstream singles chart in the UK, Canada, Scotland, Spain, and Sweden, and hitting the top 20 rock charts in the United States. The Brave New World album was dropped just 3 weeks later, an album that was by most accounts all killer, no filler, featuring fan favorites like Blood Brothers and Dream of Mirrors. The sound was reflective of a more mature band, but was still unmistakably and undeniably Iron Maiden. It received almost unanimous positive reviews, except for the apparent 20-somethings at Blabbermouth and NME at the time, who couldn't understand how Maiden could compete in a landscape dominated by heavy acts like Slipknot and Korn at the time. Blabbermouth said the album was tired and uninspiring, while NME said that the band's dismissal of the outside world, which kept them safe all those years, now leaves them looking rather obsolete. Despite these less than complimentary reviews by a small handful of critics, fans loved it. The album hit the top 40 in the US and number 7 in the UK. The subsequent Brave New World tour took in over 80 shows and saw the band return to larger venues. The tour culminated with a headline performance in front of 250,000 people at Brazil's Rock in Rio festival, which would be recorded for posterity, a band at the peak of its powers. This wasn't a comeback or a reunion tour. This was just the next chapter in the evolution of Maiden. A chapter that, as history has it, would turn out to be longer than the 20 years since the band released its self-titled album back in 1980. Meanwhile, Judas Priest could only look on with stunned disbelief and perhaps a hint of jealousy and wonder, as they were still navigating life without Rob Halford. Around the same time, Priest had ventured back into the studio with Tim Ripper Owens to record what would become Demolition, the band's 14th studio album. The album received mostly negative reviews, although it did feature some standout tracks, like the closer, Metal Messiah. The album charted poorly and sold poorly, forcing the band to have their own frontman reckoning. Demolition, like Jugulator, was also released on SPV, a label which would go bankrupt in 2009, and would be noted by the band's management today as the reason why neither album appears on Spotify and other streaming services. Ripper, who would soon be fired from Priest, isn't so sure, feeling that his contributions have been erased from Priest's history. Judas Priest haven't played any Ripper-era songs live since his unceremonial dismissal from the band in 2003, which came by way of Fax Machine. Ripper's departure left the door open for Judas Priest's own retribution story. Sitting at a coffee shop in 2003, 11 years after quitting Judas Priest, Rob Halford quietly sips his coffee and puts pen to paper. He pours his heart out, writing an 8-page long letter. The letter, essentially a love letter, is addressed to Judas Priest, and in it, he declares how much he misses the band.
It was a really intimate and personal letter. So I sent that off to Trinifold, our management people, and just let it go. I just thought, let's see what happens. But at least I had got it out of my soul, out of my system.
Shortly thereafter, Rob Halford had a phone call with Judas Priest, not to discuss a reunion, but to discuss the particulars of the band's Metallurgy box set, which took in the back catalogue of Priest. After the box set was discussed though, the last item on the agenda was a casual question directed at Halford. So, are you coming back?
And I was just left in my kitchen going, gosh, I'm back in Priest, which is it was so British, you know how blokes can be, don't make a fuss. It was so blokey, but it was beautiful. I felt like I just wanted to go out into the streets in Walsall and scream, I'm back in Priest, I'm back in Priest.
With that, the band got to work on its answer to Brave New World, Angel of Retribution. Released in 2005, the album received mostly positive reviews, with Metal Hammer voting it Album of the Year. Commercially, it was also a return to form of sorts, landing the band at number 13 on the US chart. Maiden and Priest were back, and they were at the top of their games. In the subsequent 20 years, Iron Maiden would enjoy some of their best chart success, owing perhaps to the fact that the band had been around for so long, had become such a symbol of metal, and now appealed to multiple generations of fans, from teenagers through to 60-plus-year-olds. All of Maiden's subsequent 5 albums, from 2003's Dance of Death to 2021's Senjutsu, would all hit the top 10 album chart in the UK, with this feat being replicated in the US, for all except the Dance of Death album, which hit number 18 on the Billboard chart. Maiden's most recent release, Senjutsu, hit number 2 in the UK, number 3 in the US, number 3 in Australia, number 1 in Canada, and number 1 in Germany, a good 41 years after the release of their debut album in 1980. The band now enjoys playing to larger audiences than ever, thanks to their multi-generational appeal. Case in point, on the Fear of the Dark tour, Iron Maiden played just one show in Melbourne, Australia, at Festival Hall, a rundown old boxing hall with a capacity of just 5,500 people. But on the Band Somewhere Back in Time World Tour in 2008, 16 years later, they played 2 sold-out shows at Melbourne's 15,000-seat Rod Laver Arena, performing to more than 5 times the amount of people in that city than they did back in 1992. Demand for Maiden live shows is greater than it's ever been, and the band's live shows have become more ambitious than ever, featuring full-scale fighter jets amongst other things. Speaking of ambitious stage productions and aeroplanes, the band's 2008 World Tour would be the first featuring Ed Force One, the band's own aeroplane, co-piloted by none other than certified pilot Mr. Bruce Dickinson. The band had been told that it wasn't economically viable to visit places like India, Costa Rica, or even Australia and take their full-scale stage production. But Dickinson thought that if you just loaded everything, the band, equipment, and support staff, into one airplane, he could fly the band to an almost European-type itinerary, but on a global scale. And so, Ed Force One was born. Priest, on the other hand, have released 3 albums since 2005's return to form. Nostradamus in 2008, Redeemer of Souls in 2014, and the widely praised Firepower in 2018. Firepower peaked at number 5 in the US and UK, number 2 in Germany, number 3 in Canada, and number 12 in Australia, and featured the unforgettable Hellish title track. However, despite their success, the band has again had to deal with internal politics and some significant lineup changes. After decades of dedication and contributing to the iconic Priest sound, founding member KK Downing decided to part ways with the band in 2011. The reasons behind his departure were multifaceted, with Downing saying it was due to an ongoing breakdown in working relationships with elements of the band and management for some time. And in 2018, Glenn Tipton would also step down from the band, owing to complications arising from Parkinson's disease. He wasn't alone in his health issues, with former and longtime drummer Dave Holland sadly succumbing to lung cancer that same year. He was 69 years old. While both KK and Tipton were replaced by able and willing guitar heroes Richie Faulkner and Andy Sneap, they will both forever go down in history as the guitarists for Judas Priest. And in November of 2022, they would rejoin the band for one glorious evening, the band's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Rock legend Alice Cooper welcomed them on stage and described Priest as the definitive heavy metal band.
Hello. You know, you start off all those years ago and you rebel against the establishment. You want to do it your way. You want to be different and try and be unique. And you carry that through with you over the years until suddenly you realise that you've become the establishment and people are rebelling against you. And here we are, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, that's the ultimate establishment. And so now I am proud and honoured to be a part of that. Thank you.
Missing from the induction, though, was Tim "Ripper" Owens, who had some choice words to say about the snub.
Here's how I look at it. I'm in the Hall of Fame. I was in the band for almost 10 years. When someone says that Judas Priest is in the Hall of Fame, I sang for Judas Priest, so I'm basically in the Hall of Fame. It just would have been nice to get an email or a call. The only emails I ever get are threats. It's a shame because we're friends. It's a shame that's all management is worried about. Instead of, we should probably send a letter to Tim or a bottle of champagne to thank him for his years in the band.
Ripper did, however, reunite with KK Downing, forming KK's Priest in 2020 and releasing the album Sermons of the Sinner a year later, which featured the thunderous Hellfire Thunderbolt. Politics aside though, Judas Priest has well and truly cemented themselves as metal gods. Maiden, while considered twice for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, are yet to have their moment in the sun. But Steve Harris isn't bothered.
It's very nice if people give you awards or accolades, but we didn't get into the business for that sort of thing. So with what we do, whatever comes of it is great. Whatever doesn't come of it is great too.
As Rolling Stone writes, Iron Maiden's innovation, dedication to their craft, influence, and complete refusal to compromise their artistry should have made them first-year inductees into the Hall of Fame. They're musical visionaries in the same league as Pink Floyd, Queen, U2, and even the Beatles. Just louder. External accolades aside, when all has been said and done, Iron Maiden, with little support from mainstream media outlets, have released 17 studio albums, selling 130 million copies of their albums worldwide and receiving more than 600 certifications in the process. Judas Priest, on the other hand, have released 18 studio albums, selling north of 50 million copies worldwide. Today, it's Iron Maiden that is far more likely to be headlining festivals and packing out stadiums than Priest, who tends to appear slightly lower on the big festival bills and headline slightly smaller venues. Perhaps owing to the fact that only Ian Hill and Rob Halford remain of the classic lineup. Whatever the case, both bands have left an almost 50-year-long legacy that will be near impossible to replace in a digital world characterized by instant gratification and short attention spans. And both bands have served as inspirations for countless metal bands that have come after them. Metallica's Lars Ulrich cites Iron Maiden as the biggest inspiration on the band.
They have always been the hard rock bands, one that's probably inspired Metallica the most. They had cooler record covers, they had cooler the stories, and they seemed to care more about the fans. They went deeper, the fan club, they had nicknames.
His bandmate James Hetfield, meanwhile, said that Judas Priest is everything Metallica wanted to be when they started out. Echoing Alice Cooper's comments, Hetfield said that if someone asked you to define what heavy metal is, Judas Priest is one of the bands you'd show them. And while Maiden, Priest, and in particular Bruce Dickinson and Rob Halford might have exchanged words over the years, the former calling out the latter for using teleprompters on stage, nowadays there is nothing but mutual respect and a desire to tour together one final time before they die. In fact, as at the time of publishing this episode in May 2023, it's rumored that Iron Maiden are planning a 2024 world tour with support from Judas Priest and Megadeth. And if that comes to fruition, it might just be the must-see metal tour of the decade, and the perfect way to cap off and celebrate a 5-decade-long battle for heavy metal supremacy. One that has left neither Maiden or Priest as the last man standing, but heavy metal fans worldwide raising their fists victorious, enjoying a rich back catalogue spanning 35 studio albums worth of glorious heavy metal music, and inspiring countless more people to grow their hair long, pick up a guitar, form a band, and keep the metal flame burning. Thus concludes this season on Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest. If you enjoyed this season, take a moment to give us a review wherever you happen to listen to it. It goes a long way to keeping us on the charts and ensuring that we can continue to bring you season after season of quality material on some of the biggest feuds in heavy metal. Make sure to subscribe to the show and perhaps share it with a friend or two. If you'd like to follow us online, you can do so on Twitter at BattleBandsPod, and you can sign up to our mailing list at battleofthebandspod.com to be notified whenever we drop a new season. I used many sources to put together this season, including Mick Wall's book Run to the Hills, Martin Popoff's book Heavy Metal Painkillers, as well as various online publications such as Louder Sound, Blabbermouth, Metal Hammer, Kerrang, Loudwire, NME, Rolling Stone, Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, Planet Radio, and of course, Wikipedia. Those quotes you heard throughout this season were predominantly AI-generated recreations of what band members and management actually said on the record. While I've got you, who would you like us to cover next? Which battle of the bands do you think is worthy of a full season? Let us know on Twitter at BattleBandsPod. And stay tuned for our special encore episode to this season, featuring heavy metal historian who has penned over 100 books on the topic, Mr. Martin Popoff. Until then, keep your fists high, keep your horns in the air, and perhaps go and listen to some Iron Maiden or Judas Priest. Battle of the Bands was written, narrated, recorded, and produced by me, Steve Glaveski, for No Filter Media.